I think there are one or two points that we should first of all attempt to clarify, not only in connection with the discussion of this evening, but with the present series in general. This is not intended to convey any disrespect for the ideas of psychic phenomena. We're not attempting to disprove psychic phenomena. What we are attempting to do is to point out personal experiences, particularly in those areas of so-called or actual psychic phenomena, which have a direct bearing upon the psychological integration of the individual. Various types of obsession or spirit possession have been recorded since the very beginning of human experience. Many references to these subjects are to be found in the Bible, and they occur in the sacred writings of many other countries. Possession by demons is part of the oldest legendary and lore of our human race. We also realize that for many thousands of years, all so-called psychic phenomena had to be interpreted in terms of observation only. There was no knowledge as to the more subtle workings of the human psychological entity. There was no way of differentiating between, for instance, a legitimate example of spirit control and hysteria. We know definitely, from going back over the old records, that many mistakes were made in the interpretation of these various mysteries which involve ghosts and diabolism generally. There was no way in which it could be otherwise, because all that could be done was to judge from appearances, from the seemingness of things. And from this seemingness, even today, we suffer considerably, not only in our objective, but in our subjective consciousness. Even at this time, any form of mental disturbance is terrifying to the average person. Something in him goes back to the most primitive atavistic experiences of his race. He does not know how to cope with this type of situation. Very often he has no clear concept of right attitude toward the mentally disturbed. He is afraid of them, or else he takes the position that they're putting it all on, or that they could straighten themselves out if they wanted to, and things of this nature. It's very hard for us to handle this type of ailment even now. It is one of the most difficult and thankless jobs in the world. This brings us definitely to several situations that I think we have to clarify. First of all, the term obsession, as it is now used, has two distinct meanings. Obsession in old times and among metaphysicians today implies the control of the conscious faculties of a person by the consciousness of some other being. Obsession, therefore, is really an individual whose inner life has been taken over or stolen from him by something else. And this something else or someone else is now using the body of that person. This type of obsession, of course, belongs largely to the older theological concepts. It was believed in for thousands of years before any modern psychological theory was available, and various exorcisms to drive out these obsessing or possessing spirits are recorded in all the religious literature of mankind. The second type of meaning for the word obsession is very largely recent. And obsession has come psychologically to mean that the individual is possessed by some fragment of his own total personality. By obsession is meant an extraordinary fixation of some kind. Therefore, we say that a person is obsessed by an idea, that he is possessed by a notion. We feel that under certain conditions also, certain phases of the personality can become completely possessive, that the individual can be possessed by his own fears, by his own worries, by his own anxieties. And the moment the person loses control of his total personality, and some other part of that personality usurps power, we are inclined to think of it as obsession. A man, as we realize, is made up of a number of different natures, a number of different fragmentary personalities. Under normal conditions, these are all subservient to the dominant psychic mood. They are dominant only perhaps in dreams or in sleep, but in consciousness, the fragments are under the control of a leader. And this leader is the normal self-consciousness of the person. While this leadership is maintained, any effort to break the natural harmony of such organization is observed as a dangerous symptom. The total consciousness, therefore, rejects minor aberrations. It refuses to grant to certain phases of its own nature the power to control the rest. Thus, for example, an individual who has an inordinate attitude toward alcohol, who likes to drink too much, if he has a controlling consciousness, this consciousness tells him to get sober and stay sober, and he does. As long as this consciousness is ruling, all of these pressures that are within the personality are held in check. It is like a strong government. While government is strong, crime and all these other antisocial factors are very largely controlled. If government becomes weak or corrupted, then we find immediately a lowering of the general condition of the community. Now, one thing that is always noticeable, where weakness afflicts the central area of consciousness, that as a result there is always a lowering. The threshold drops. The individual who ceases to exercise his own consciousness is not benefited in any way by this loss of central control. It is very difficult to imagine a great nation that would be better if it had no laws. Actually, there are a few people to whom perhaps the absence of law would have very little effect upon living. But for the overwhelming majority, the moment legal defense was lowered, crime would increase. Now, it is the same in the case of the individual lowering the defenses of his own consciousness. He is never the better if the central conscious core loses control. Whatever fragments take over are always less than the total picture. Therefore, we find almost no indication that possession or obsession or control of any kind, whether considered psychically or psychologically, that such control contributes a great deal to the improvement of the person. Usually something is weakened. And this is all the more true in the case of psychological control. Now, the old religions of the world have pointed out that there have been legitimate instances in which a comparatively humble person has been overshadowed by a great spiritual being. That for one reason or another, the individual has come to be possessed by a sacred or holy spirit, that a holy spirit has descended upon them, as the mysterious spirit that descended upon the apostles at Pentecost. Obviously, we would not expect a divine spirit descending upon an individual to hurt them, to corrupt them, or to lead them away from the paths of righteousness and right conduct. Thus, from even the time of Aquinas and Albertus Magnus in the Middle Ages, it was customary to divide spirits into constructive and destructive. And perhaps we can formulate a very simple rule. If a person is controlled by a higher part of his own nature than normally controls him, we may then say that he has an extension of consciousness, that he has a mystical experience, that his consciousness becomes more illumined, more enlightened, and out of the consequences of this illumination, he is dedicated to a holy life, or at least he is dedicated to some course of action superior to his condition prior to this enlightenment. Thus we can say that the mystical enlightenment of Jesus, or the enlightenment of Buddha, represented consciousness unfolding into a greater dimension. It is quite evident that from such a positive consciousness, and the Neoplatonists have given us considerable material bearing on this, that the individual is improved. Thus we have to assume that an individual who has a legitimate spiritual experience is not injured thereby. By converse circumstance, an individual who is injured by any kind of a metaphysical experience cannot regard this experience as constructive. If he is injured, then the circumstance is not good. If he is improved, then perhaps the circumstance is good. But he has to be very careful in measuring the degrees and conditions of his improvement. Improvement is not measured in a sense of self-satisfaction. Improvement is not a self-delusion due to a psychosis of some nature. The individual is not simply filled with wonderfulness and then slowly collapses. This sense of superiority, of the attainment of a greater or higher level, must always be measured in terms of a better adjusted life, that the person has a larger area of constructive, real living. He is not gradually disappearing into a phantom inhabited realm. He does not vanish into a mysterious cloud of celestials. The truly enlightened person becomes a more useful, a more reasonable, a better self-disciplined, better integrated individual, with better attitudes toward every situation that can arise in life. Therefore, we have no argument whatever with any situation which causes the person to grow. If it happens that he is perfectly convinced that this growth is due to possession by a superior entity, that is his business. if he regards it as the result of a deeper internal integration with his own consciousness, this is also according to his own conviction, and he should follow his conviction. The problem is a very simple one. By their works, so shall ye know them. But if in any problem of this nature that arises, we observe that the experiences are attended by deterioration, then we must question very greatly not only the nature of the experience, but the advisability of the continuance of any circumstance contributing to it. For instance, we have all kinds of funny things that happen. People who will come in and they'll say to me, I had the most wonderful spiritual experience a few nights ago. Will you explain it for me? Now, they're perfectly certain that if they tell me the story, I can explain it for them. And yet there's something strange about a spiritual experience which in no way helps the individual to explain it himself. Here is something that is to him a proof of enlargement of consciousness. But the enlargement of consciousness doesn't tell him anything about the meaning of what has happened to him. So we must check this one aside as being, at least shall we say, doubtful. There is something unrealistic about it. The individual who becomes more and more spiritual without any increase in wisdom or insight, it's a little dangerous situation. It's something that we have to think about very carefully. Now, in the beginning, these situations perhaps are extremely borderline. But I'm reaching the place in life now where I have followed these various situations over periods of years. I have been able to see them work out in hundreds of cases. Therefore, perhaps I have a little better license to guess on these things than some other individuals who have had very limited or no experience. But this we say empirically, that the ancient divided all such psychic manifestations as spirit control, obsession, or possession into two grand classifications, one of which was possession by good spirits and the other by bad spirits. Good spirits worked good. Bad spirits worked evil. And we have to find out, if we can, what is meant by the fact that bad spirits do work evil. The first thing that you observe in most cases is that the individual coming under an obsessional or possessional condition begins to lower his threshold. This is one of the most common symptoms that we have. And the only answer immediately is that whatever it is, the situation is bad. This person is less a person than he was before. He may not do what I have seen some do, get down on the grass in front of his house and bark like a dog. But he may find that under the influence of these spirits, certain things happen. And here is a typical case, so typical that it could be multiplied to infinity. The individual has an experience which he cannot explain entirely. This experience has arisen from any one of several causes. Nearly always there is a reasonably obvious cause. And one of the most common is that he has attempted to develop spiritual faculties in some way. He has joined some organization, he has read some book, he has done something whereby he wanted to develop some spiritual overtones in his nature. Sometimes if you ask him why he wanted to, the cat is out of the bag. Because you will find in most cases that his motives while good in the common sense of the word, were not good on the level of the thing he was trying to do. He might say, well, I've always been extremely shy, I've never adjusted well socially, I wanted to develop strength of personality. Well, we have courses on the subject. No one would regard this as especially bad, but I think that an individual who is having these kind of personality deficiencies should go somewhere where they can teach him to make friends and influence people. I don't think he should use religious means to achieve this end. I think he should just take any one of the number of courses for increasing charm that are available and leave the matter in the material world where it belongs. Another individual who is lonely or neurotic or has had a broken home, is unadjusted, reaches out into these mysterious zones for almost